Welcome to Hey Listen, where we discuss faith, leadership, and the mission of the church. We're so glad you've joined us. Now to today's episode. All right, we're back with another conversation today. I'm excited about this, but I'm a little intimidated by it. So we're going to be talking about intelligent design and how that connects back to our faith. You've done a lot of reading and you have a lot of knowledge on this. I admittedly have read your notes. I've listened to your notes be read to me a few times in the last week, and I still feel like I leave those kind of like those times and I'm still going, okay, what are we talking about here? It's going a little bit over my head, but I'm excited about it. And this is an important conversation for me as a mom and for us in ministry. This is foundational for our kids. We need to understand this.
Yeah, I want to just say right up front, I'm not a scientist. When I first went into college, I was going to be a doctor. I thought that's what God had called me to be. So I do have a little bit of experience at the university level in classes, but it really was the basic kind of stuff, the basic biologies and chemistries and physics and things of that nature. So I never got to go very far in that world, but I appreciated it and loved it. And there is going to be a little bit of nerding out, obviously here, but I hope people will understand. There's three main resources that we're going to link to this. The goal here is not to provide a robust apologetic for people in terms of science versus or faith versus science, I guess, but to say there are incredibly smart guys out there and incredibly smart women out there who are writing these brilliant books that are showing that the Darwinian view of origins is not the only game in town. And over the years, we've watched so many of our kids go to secular school and university, and they're just overwhelmed because there is no other perspective than the Darwinian perspective. I can tell you, when I was at Murray State University all those years ago, the talk of anything faith-oriented was just not acceptable.
Sure.
Like, that was not part of the conversation. They made fun of people because it was there in Western Kentucky, and a lot of the students, came from evangelical backgrounds, and they would just literally, I heard the professors, I heard the lab assistants making fun of people of faith. So here's the thing. What we want to do is, when our kids face that, we want them to be able to know that there is another perspective. Yeah. And I believe that the arguments and the evidence that we're going to be covering in the next few episodes, and we're going to be talking about some things. We're going to talk about Darwin a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about quantum physics, way over my head there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about biology, and our last one, we're going to talk about pond scum, of all things, because the protein molecules in there are, Douglas Axe, one of the books we're going to recommend, Undeniable, he does a brilliant job of just showing the complexity in something as simple as pond scum, and how when you have something that complex, you know, if you see a car going down the road, he says, you see a Ferrari going down the road, you know, the Italians know what they're doing, but somebody built that, right? And you look into a protein molecule and you see these amino acids and how they fold and all these different things, and you say, okay, wait a second, that is so, like, we can't do it, like we can't engineer on that level, that small level. So you say, okay, if it's engineered, who's the engineer? So that's where we're going to land at the end of all this. But really, today, what we need to do is just kind of introduce the subject. And I just wanted to be clear with people. Like, it is a little bit nerdy here, but I'm telling you, if you are like my family, we sent our daughter to a secular high school, a regular, public school, and then she went to a secular university. We were having these conversations, preparing her for that world. We knew that she was going to have conversations with people who would literally make fun of her if she just came in, quoting Genesis 1 and 2, right? When it came to creation. So we can do that. I believe in Genesis 1 and 2 story. I think that it's a pre-scientific document that actually describes what's happening in the creation of the world. Now we look back and say, oh my goodness, that's actually describing something very scientific, but that's not its purpose. And so we need to understand that when we bring the Bible into the equation, a modern thinker is going to say, oh, that's, that's pre-scientific. That's not a scientific document. It's not meant to be. It's literature, and yet it can't really be disproved by science. In fact, it kind of fits, and we're going to talk about that too. But I really want people to understand that this is a great opportunity for us to have a conversation that can help us train our kids to know that there are other opinions. Like anytime you go into an environment and they're like, it's my way or the highway, I'm going to tell you, unless it's Jesus is Lord, be suspicious of that kind of behavior. And scientists right now, if you listen to the some of the more popular ones, I'm not going to name names, but that do their little videos and are very well known, their names are out there everywhere, they're championing science. They act like that's the only show in town. That's the only real knowledge. And even secular philosophers would argue against that. Like that scientific knowledge has its limits. It can only describe certain physical realities, but it can't go deeper than that. It can only stay with the observable, repeatable, those kinds of things. And we all know that truth is deeper than just that. But again, sometimes when our kids are facing these challenges and they hear a really solid argument being made, they can be swayed by that if they're not aware that there's other ways to think through these things.
Sure. So one note that I had, and I think this kind of just segues into your next spot, but just the, someone like me growing up hearing the creation story, it's what we teach. We sing songs about it, all of the things. It's encouraging to hear that science can actually support faith. And I think that's kind of, where we're going with all of this. But one of the books that you had some notes on was the God hypothesis. Is that kind of where we're going to head to first? Yeah, let's talk about that. So Stephen Meyer is a philosopher of science. So he's a scientist, but his real specialty, where he is so good, is kind of looking at the philosophical claims that science makes. And he's very good at helping us see the benefits of science, but also the limitations of science. So there was a time in philosophy over 100 years ago, a group of people called, I think, the logical positivists. And they had decided, I don't know who gave them the privilege to do this, but they decided that the only truth that they would believe in is if it was scientifically verifiable. And that sounds really good in principle, but again, in the real world, there are a lot of things that one can't technically, empirically verify. And so it's funny how that philosophy for a while really was taking root. And then the clear-headed thinkers and people like Myers can say, that just doesn't work. But what Myers does is he really helps us to see that a true Christian worldview is never at odds with true science. Because what science is doing is it is trying to understand the world in which we live, right? And it's all about observations and experimentation and things of that nature. And one of the little secrets that they don't tell you when you're in, Biology 101 is that the whole thing, even though the Greeks really did start the process of really being good students of nature. So Aristotle is probably the one Greek philosopher everybody would know that really spoke to this. And other Greek philosophers did as well, but Aristotle would be the most famous. A lot of his writings are observations of the natural world. And so the Greeks they did believe in a creator God. Okay, so it's not the God of the Bible, but they did believe in a God who created. And so as they're looking out at the world, the Greeks said, wait a second, all this stuff kind of like, you can make sense out of it. It's logical. It's cosmos, and we get the word cosmology from that, right? Or ordered. They believed that the universe was ordered. So in the Greek worldview, there was cosmos and chaos, and the idea was the intelligent person would study the world around them to see what was cosmos. Okay, so the Greeks sort of are the foundation of that, but really science has its origins in the late medieval, early Enlightenment period. So now we get into Europe. 14, 15, 1600s. And now you start having people
questioning kind of the medieval, it's almost silliness, some of the things of the flat earth and all that kind of stuff. You had Galileo and others, and I've been there in Padua, Italy. I've seen right where Galileo worked. You know, I've seen that area, the college town, so to speak, from the medieval age, where some of those early observations of the universe were made. And these guys were Christians, and they believed that their Christian faith drove them to see that there was order. So this idea that science and faith are at odds simply isn't part of the historical record. It's actually quite the opposite. That true science and true faith are not at odds. But what we see today is we see kind of like, okay, scientists aren't just scientists, but they are philosophically, and this is where Myers is really good at showing us that scientists today are materialists, okay? In general, this is general. There's a lot of scientists out there that have deep faith, and of course, writing these books we're going to recommend, like the God hypothesis. But these individuals are materialists. So in their worldview, they start from the perspective that there really isn't any spiritual world or no God. So that's why you have them. It's not that they're advocating, okay, I'm just going to say, like Bill Nye is not advocating for science as much as he's advocating for materialism.
Yeah.
Okay. So he does not believe in a creator God. He believes in Darwinian origins and Darwinian theory because it is a materialist idea, meaning that there is no spiritual world. There's only the natural process and the different things in nature. And so he celebrates that, and that's fine. And he promotes science, which is okay. But what he's doing is he's really promoting something more like materialism and scientism, and that's a term we'll get to, I think, in our third episode, where we say, okay, what science? Yes, but when we turn science into a quasi-religion, which when you listen to these individuals, that's how it sounds.
Yes,
like they are the priest, and if you don't agree with their truth, then you're a heretic, right?
Oh yeah.
So it is so interesting to me that, people who are critiquing Christianity, they'll go back to like the papacy, right? The Roman Catholic Church, and they'll say, oh, they were burning heretics at the stake, and they were, if you didn't agree with their dogma, blah, blah, blah. Now look at modern science and how they treat anybody that comes up like a Stephen Meyer and has a different perspective. He has an intelligent design perspective. Douglas Axe has an intelligent design perspective, and they are literally chased out of the profession. Okay, well, that sounds a whole lot like medieval Catholicism and burning people at the stake. To me, at least their careers, they're burning them down. So what I would say is once again, we want people to realize that our science friends that are materialists, perhaps they want to act like they've got the high ground, like they have the philosophical high ground. Actually, they don't. They're putting all of their eggs in this materialistic basket that more and more seems to be proven to be not adequate to describe the world as it is. So that's where it gets a little bit strange, and I would say that. A couple things to talk about here is a lot of what we're going to talk about is intelligent design. And intelligent design is a little bit different than, like, you and I were raised in a Baptist church. We've talked about this a lot, right? So like the Genesis story from the beginning, we were taught that's how the world came to be. So we are creationist in that sense. You and I were trained to think of the world not as a material world as much as a God created world. A world that is created by this spiritual being that made time and space as we see it in Genesis 1 and 2. So that's kind of where we come from. Now, Stephen Meyer and these other authors, they're coming from a more, now they may land in the same place that a creationist does, but they approach creation from intelligent design. So they start not with Genesis 1 and 2, but they start with science and the observations of creation. Okay. So they're looking at it and saying, okay, I realize there's all these mathematical equations that are so precise when it comes to like the rotation of the Earth, the all these angles that the planet Earth sits at, it's off its axis. Just all of that makes life possible in this world. So they're looking at all these, and Stephen Meyer is so good at this. There's all these different things that just show life on Earth. It is such a rare thing. We can look out with the Webb Space Telescope now, and they still can't find, there's no aliens out there waving back at us.
Right.
Everything we're seeing is still cold, dark, and dead. And the reason why is because it doesn't take one or two or three factors to have life on a planet. It takes like hundreds, and they all have to line up just perfect. And that's where the God hypothesis comes in, where we begin to realize, okay, wait a second. If all of this stuff is engineered for life, who's the engineer?
Right. And I think that's what, just as I was doing, my own kind of just research and looking and reading your notes, it just it gets me fired up and excited. And the fact that I do have the opportunity to teach and to point kids to truth. But even just what you were saying about kind of their perspective and these authors and where they're going, even that was helpful to me. Cause I'm like, okay, I'm just kind of putting things together, but it is, to do, I don't know, it's mind blowing, and just to wrap our brains around all of those things.
It's exciting, incredible. And it's intimidating because most of us, it's been a long time since Biology 101. It's been a long time since Chemistry 101. If we ever learned any physics, it just made us cry. I can remember back when you had to buy those big calculators for the chemistry. Oh my goodness. Or the trigonometry. We're talking about stuff that most of us at the Muniz household, we're literature people. We're not mathematicians at our place. So all of this stuff is intimidating when you start looking at it down in the weeds. But that's why I said earlier, look, I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I am saying there are experts out there that are writing good things that we need to at least interact with.
Right.
So that when our kids come home and are asking questions about where we come from, that we can not just say, well, go to Genesis 1 and read it.
Yes.
That's true. That's okay, but that's not going to help them.
Right.
That's not going to help them stay strong in their faith at university. It just isn't. Let me read. I want to just read. The intelligent design person, I was saying a moment ago, is a little different than creationists. Okay. They can land in the same place, but they have a different methodology. So the intelligent design proponent, and this is, I think, from Meyer, I'm quoting him. No, actually, this is Douglas Axe who said this.
Okay.
He said, the intelligent design proponent starts with a commitment to the essential principles of science and shows how those principles ultimately compel us to attribute life to a purposeful inventor.
I loved that line.
It's a great line, isn't it?
Purposeful inventor.
God had a purpose and a plan in creation.
Yes.
And that purpose and plan is not just random. It is literally written in mathematics, in mathematical equations that define to a precision beyond randomness, beyond the possibility of randomness. It shows that someone has put this all together.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I often say to kids, God created you on purpose and for a purpose. But to think, not only did he create, each of us, but everything purposefully.
That's right.
Nothing was just by accident.
So a big part of this discussion, and we have about 10 minutes left on the clock. So I want us to talk about, Darwin. And Darwin is a fascinating figure. When you start reading, philosophers and thinkers and writers, and they start talking about some of the most important minds of the last 200 years, Darwin is always on the list. I think he's overrated. Honestly, the more I've interacted with his writings, The Origin of Species, things of that nature, what we realize is Darwin was a great writer, but he wasn't necessarily an original thinker. All of his ideas were actually floating around a generation or two before him.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, he didn't invent the concept of evolution or natural selection is probably where he was the most articulate, and there is definitely some truth in the macro, in the sense that that the micro, there are slight changes where you see over time creatures develop different attributes over time. So I can remember in Biology 101 when I was, I think this was high school, Mr. Hassenberg. I remember him talking about like bald-headedness is an evolutionary development and the reason why is because humans don't need hair like they once did. And so he was arguing that as humans evolve, they will have no hair on their head because they don't need it for warmth. Now that's kind of a silly example, but that just would show you, is that possible? Maybe, right? Where okay, over time we learned how to make hats, so now we don't need hair.
Interesting.
Maybe. But the whole point is that with Darwin, he wrote this book called Origin of the Species. Here's the problem. It doesn't really emphasize origins. Origin of the Species actually talks about natural selection, but it really doesn't talk about origins. Now it talks about mutations, and Stephen Meyer, here's what he says.
I like this line.
Mutation and natural selection can account for the survival of the fittest, but not the arrival of the fittest.
Yes.
That is one of the best sentences I know of to describe the main weakness in Darwinian theory.
Right.
It does get natural selection right to a certain point. And I think there's limits to that, because what we see when we read these books that we're going to recommend is we see that the idea of mutations. So anybody that's ever watched what is it, the movies, about the mutants? Oh my goodness. Help me out, Colby. The X-Men. There we go.
Oh, I was thinking like Ninja Turtles. I don't know.
Well, that works too. That's a little more radical, although it's all radical. So in X-Men, so I look over there and Colby's going like this. Come on, Pastor, you know this. So in X-Men, if you go watch that show, okay. So look, sometimes it's good. Like movies, they're not as silly as you think. These movies are actually built on worldview. So the scientific Darwinian worldview says that things change radically due to mutation. So something mutates, and then all of a sudden a fish becomes, an aardvark or something like that eventually. I'm just making that up. But essentially that's what you got, right? You have single cells, and the next thing you have fish, and the next thing you have aardvarks. So the problem with that is that science, the more we study mutations are never positive. They're almost always negative. And that is to say that when a mutation occurs, it causes more harm to the organism over time if that mutation is passed along. But if you watch X-Men, you would think, oh no, you want mutations because that gives you superpowers. Well, that's the whole idea is in X-Men, the idea is that humans are evolving and eventually they're going to become, quote unquote, we're going to have supermen and women among us. It's just not true. That's not what mutations do. Usually a mutation leads to an end of a line, not the beginning.
It weakens.
It weakens it.
Right.
So, and again, that's beyond my pay grade. I would just suggest, read the research that these men have done, and you go, okay, all right. But once again, Darwin, that's kind of where he's going to fall short. And one of the things we'll be talking about, I think in our last episode is kind of like the genetic element. And everybody knows that the double helix, like when you went to Science 101, you have the double helix model, and that there's all these different like letters but what those are, it's pretty simple for us to see it now because of computers. It's just computer programming. So your DNA is complex computer programming, if you want to look at it that way. But that's just it. It is so infinitely complex. It's not a simple thing. So what you see is that this genetic research that's being done is showing that there is something going on in our cells that is very sophisticated. And, we can look at DNA, and we can see now in places where there's breakdowns in the proteins. Those are the mutations that we were talking about a moment ago. And so now we're starting to see that. But again, it's not a simple fix, right? It's not an easy thing. It's very complicated. Another thing that's really shaking up science these days is it's not just the genetic stuff. It's the it's the universe itself. We're starting to realize now, because we can see so far out in space, that a lot of our theories are starting to get challenged, because the more we see, the more it's humbling our scientific knowledge. And so right there, that ought to tell us, like, science is really good, but science is always morphing and changing.
Right.
As we learn more, actually what we're getting is more questions, not answers.
Sure.
So I think a big part, from my perspective as a person of faith, I want to say to the scientists, I am so glad they're doing the work. But I also want to say to the scientist, hey, wait a second. Don't be so ugly with people who disagree with you. Like, not everything that scientists believed 20 years ago is still considered truth today.
Sure.
Things change.
Yeah.
And so I think there needs to be some humility there. And I think people of faith, what we can see is that there's nothing in our faith that science can really disprove.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's a big statement. And one of the authors says that's a really big statement, that when we go to the Bible, it's telling us things about the world that are true. It is not trying to describe the world scientifically, but that doesn't mean it's telling us about a world that's not real. It's not describing an imaginary world. It's just describing the world as it is. And science is proving that. But one more thing before we wrap up here. So when scientists started to look at all of the factors needed for life to develop on Earth, they began to realize that the statistical reality was beyond, like, the numbers are so big. So they realized, because one of the things Darwin said is, given enough time, anything can happen in an evolutionary sense. You just need a lot of time for everything to line up right. The universe is not that old. It's not old enough.
Yeah.
So scientists admit that now. And one of the things that they've come up as, in terms of a working hypothesis, is there's the multiverse. So once again, if we're watching science fiction movies, we hear about the multiverse a lot. So basically what they're saying is, okay, if I don't have enough time, then let's imagine that there's infinite numbers of universes, because now if I have an infinite number of universes, I don't have to worry about time. Right. I just have to be thankful that I just happen to be in the one universe where it all lines up.
Just a nice coincidence.
Isn't that interesting? So that shows you how far people will go.
Yeah.
Now, I have some friends that study quantum physics, and they say this multiverse thing is like, there's something to it. So I don't want to dismiss it outright. But sometimes I think people come up with these ideas, instead of going with the simpler, the more reasonable hypothesis that Meyer would call that God did it. Instead, what we do is we come up with a multiverse idea, which is pure science fiction, it seems like, to me. But anyways, we move on in this conversation. This is the baseline. What we want to say is, again, don't buy into science being at odds with faith. What we want to do is we want to open our minds as people of faith to scientific reason and rationale. It's a good thing. We don't need to push it away, but we don't need to think that it's the final arbiter of truth. We land on, thus says the Lord.
Yeah.
We believe in a God who created the world, that he's real, and he speaks to us through his word. But he's also made a world that we can discern and think through together.
Yeah. Well, I have felt a little bit like a bobblehead over here. I just keep nodding and smiling, but it's not because I'm just nodding and smiling to play along. I'm fascinated by this. So thank you just for sharing. Our next episode will continue this conversation talking quantum physics. So I'm sure there will be more nodding and smiling.
Here we go.
Thank you again for joining us today. We'll see you next time on Hey Listen.